Welcome back to my channel. Today I will show you a sci-fi, romance, drama film, The Passengers. You can observe the interstellar starship Avalon traveling through space on its way to the Homestead 2 colony world. The ship is on autopilot, and every one of its compartments is vacant. Both the 5,000 passengers and the 258 crew members are dormant. The ship suddenly enters an asteroid belt, which weakens its shields. Power is switched to the primary shield, but the ship is headed straight for a massive obstacle. The ship suddenly collides with the asteroid, resulting in numerous problems. One of the sleep pods activates as the ship starts its own repairs. Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer, was the passenger who was awakened. An automatic mechanism aids in his wake-up by letting him know when his pod has opened. Spent 120 years in suspended animation, and the spacecraft will reach Homestead in about 4 months. He is informed that he can use that time to take use of the sumptuous features of the ship before arriving on the planet. Jim is given instructions regarding his ID band, his cabin, and the main activities he is to participate in. He gets ready, exits his cabin, and enters an automated lesson intended for a large group of learners while feeling both anxious and excited to meet the other passengers. The hologram describes Earth's plight as being overpopulated, pricey, and overrated, while Jim shows signs of anxiety. Even though it instructs him to save his questions for the end of the course, Jim can't help but wonder why he's the only one present. He goes looking for other people after realizing that the hologram is unable to respond to him. He arrives at the ship's main concourse. Although there is no one present, an automated information desk gives assistance. When Jim requests to meet with a real person, he is sent to speak with the steward. However, when he arrives and no one is there, he requests to speak with the captain. Even though he is unable to enter, he can see that none of the main crew members are awake as he arrives at the bridge. The ship is actually 90 years away from Homestead 2 when Jim finally visits the observatory. He quickly returns to the concourse after realizing he was awake too soon and sends a message to Earth, begging for advice because he doesn't know how to go back into hibernation. His call to Earth would cost too much, and the communication system informs him that it would take 55 years to hear back. Jim is heartbroken. He explores and comes to the ship's bar, where he meets another individual. He appears odd to the bartender as they are conversing. Jim discovers that the man is an android when he tries to buy him a drink. It has the name Arthur. Jim desires how he could arrive earlier than expected. The following morning, when Jim wakes up in his cabin, he walks to the cantina but finds that the majority of the items on the menu are only available to gold-class travelers. He orders himself a simple cup of coffee and starts trying to figure out how to mend his hibernation chamber. He manages to turn it on once he has all the necessary tools. Then he lies down inside of a pod. However, nothing occurs. He then makes the decision to use the tools he discovered to enter the crew's hibernation chambers. That is also unsuccessful. There are minor issues all over the ship. Jim frequently visits the bar to drink but largely to speak with Arthur. Android displays and try to have some fun on the ship. Jim tries all the restaurants, the games, the entertainment system, but as time passes he becomes even more miserable to be there alone. One day, he gets drunk and wanders around the hibernation pods. When he stumbles into an airlock with spacesuits designed for spacewalks, Jim gets into a suit and goes to the airlock, pushes a lever and then the button to release the airlock door. Once outside the ship he's mesmerized by the view. He's the only conscious human being experiencing that moment in time. Jim releases the magnets on his boots and floats in space. Feeling devastated, he comes back inside, takes off the suit, but goes back to the airlock without it on. He pulls the lever, ready to end it all, but changes his mind in the last moment, runs back inside and slips on a bottle. Jim stands up and is instantly drawn to a woman in one of the pods, named Aurora. He searches for her files in the directory and listens to her passenger interview, becoming enamored with her. Later he's seen sitting next to her pod, still listening to her interviews. Back in the bar, he's reading some of her work and is talking to Arthur about her writing. He becomes obsessed with the irony of his situation, going to another planet for a better life, waking up early and not getting there, and finding his perfect woman, only for her to be out of reach. Jim continues to think about her and also begins to entertain the idea of waking her up. He talked about it with the robot, but he didn't understand the riddle. If he awakened her for his own good, he would leave her there with him until death. Jim initially decided not to do it, but as time passed, He couldn't let go until the day he changed his mind. He goes to his module and finds a way to activate it. When she woke up and went through the same process as him, he escaped and returned in his room. After a while, he walked towards the main hall, hoping to find her, and here she was, just as confused as he was a year ago. Jim tells him they are the only ones awake and takes him to the observatory. He then tells him that he cannot reach the crew or the ship's main controls. Aurora panics and wants to return to her module. When they get there, Jim explains that there is no special equipment on board that can help them enter a state of hibernation, effectively communicating that they are trapped. They return to the hall and he tells her that she should rest since she just arrived. Exit hibernation. She felt sorry for him as he had to stay alone on the ship for more than a year. Jim returns to the bar and regrets what he did. He asked Arthur not to tell Aurora that he was the one who woke her up. The next day, Aurora woke up. She returned to the lobby and asked the automated information desk about hibernation. Jim goes there with her and they go to breakfast. When they left, the information desk had some problem. At the cantina, Aurora realizes that Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year and get him one of the gold menus. They talk about the possibility of repairing the pods, but unlike Jim, Aurora is not ready. Give up. She searched the infirmary, then looked through the research documents, and finally entered the crew's hibernation quarters to try to open the door. Jim notices more problems throughout the ship. Sometime later, Aurora complains about her life on Avalon. She wrote, jogged around the ship and swam in the pool, becoming more and more aware about his situation. She went to the cafeteria to interview Jim and thought his story might be interesting. She asked why he migrated to the colony. Jim initially responded with the company's slogan, but then explained that he was hopeful that in the new world he could become someone, he could build his life. They later meet at the observatory and Aurora finally shares her reason for being there. Unlike the other passengers on the train, she had a return ticket. His idea is to go to Homestead 2, live there for a year, and return to Earth, becoming the first journalist to do so, writing the greatest story that ever existed. Aurora gradually gives up the idea of finding a way to solve her current predicament and Jim's numbers. Find a way to cheer him up. He took her to dances, to the movies, and to the basketball court. Finally, he takes her to a bar to meet Arthur. She relaxed a bit until she remembered their situation. Jim is left alone with the android, feeling terrible about what he did to him. The next moment, he is seen tinkering with something, and soon after, Aurora enters the observatory to find the miniature image of the Chrysler building that he had made for her. Sometime later, they met at a bar. They have dinner and share stories about their lives. She told him that her father died when she was a teenager. After dinner, Jim takes Aurora to the airlock and they put on their spacesuits. They went on a spacewalk together. Jim finally had someone to share this wonderful experience with. Jim turns off the magnets in their boots and they float through space together. They went back inside and immediately kissed, then returned to his cabin and slept together. Shortly after, they started living as a couple. Aurora moves into her cabin and writes about her life on the ship. They run together, eat together, sleep together. Jim explores the ship deeper and finds the hydroponic bay. He brought flowers from Aurora. One day, the ship passes by a red giant and they go to the observatory to observe it. Today was Aurora's birthday, so that evening they celebrated at one of the many restaurants on the boat and then at the bar. Jim goes into the bathroom and prepares the ring he made for Aurora, while she stays in the house. Bar chat with Arthur. The robot tells Aurora that Jim intentionally woke her up, not knowing that he was still there, to keep it secret. Suddenly, Jim turned around and she faced him in absolute disbelief. She ran away in anger and panic. Jim returns to his cabin and discovers that all of his belongings are missing. He met her in the cafeteria the next day, but as soon as he spoke, she ran away. Aurora is desperate. One night, she went to Jim's cabin, punched and kicked him, wanting to kill him. While talking to her on the phone because she continues to avoid him, Jim tries to apologize and explain his actions towards her. He tells her that he has fallen in love with her, but Aurora doesn't care. She cannot forgive him for committing suicide. One night, while Jim was in his cabin, another incident occurred. The ship encountered a fatal error and main command was shut down. Then he got into the elevator and it malfunctioned. Aurora entered the main hall and saw that Jim had planted a tree there. Then, she goes to the cantina, where the food dispensary is also malfunctioning. Suddenly, Both of them hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms, asking who planted the tree. They both run into the concourse and see Gus Mancuso standing in front of Jim's tree. They introduce themselves and tell the chief about the situation. He doesn't understand how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso takes them to the bridge and he discovers that there is something wrong with the ship, but the information on the systems has to be checked manually. When they leave the bridge, a robot almost falls on their heads and the two of them tell Mancuso that malfunctions have been happening all over the ship more frequently. He says that shouldn't happen, as he shows them how to collect the data. Mancuso checks on the pods. When Jim joins him there, he's figured out what happened with Aurora's pod. The deck chief finds what Jim did to be terrible. Later, he's at the bridge checking the collected data. When Aurora joins him, they talk about what happened with her pod, but he tells her that he can't do anything about it. Jim walks in with the 16th broken robot. Mancuso feels the hibernation sickness, so he goes to rest, but as he walks out, he coughs out blood. That night, Aurora can't sleep, so she goes for a swim. Suddenly there's gravity loss throughout the ship and she starts drowning as the water from the pool moves with her. The gravity drive resets and she barely makes it out alive. They both run into each other going to find Mancuso. The 3 of them are back at the bridge, slowly discovering what has been going on with the ship. Mancuso figures out that something happened 2 years ago, taking out a major system. They need to find and fix what has caused the failure, because the entire ship is trying to pick up the slack. If they don't fix it, the entire vessel will be stranded. They go to find the problem, but Mancuso faints, so Jim and Aurora take him to the infirmary. He is dying and there is no treatment that can stop it or prolong the time he has left. Sometime later, the 3 met at the observatory and Mancuso gave Jim the ID bracelet, tells them to repair the ship and immediately perish. Suddenly, the lights turned alarmingly red and the ship began to shake. Jim tells Aurora he needs her help and they head to engineering. But there's another problem: gravity drive failure. And immediately something else also made Arthur miserable. Jim disables it. They finally reached engineering and started looking for problems. They find it in the power plant, and when they open the hatch, Aurora is sucked in. The asteroid caused a breach in the ship's hull in this area. Jim was also sucked in, but he still clung to the trap door, which kept closing on him. Finally, he let himself be sucked in, but they quickly sealed the hole. Immediately after solving this problem, Jim realized that there were many errors in the cover. The two follow the meteor's trajectory and discover that it has hit the reactor computer control. Jim thinks he can find replacement parts. They found that part and changed it, but the reactor's ventilation still failed. They did it by hand, but it failed. Jim realizes he needs to open the air vents from outside the ship, so they can cool the reactor. They both walk towards the airlock, and as he was about to exit, he brought up Aurora Mancuso's message bracelet, because it may not come back. She helped him into his suit, and when he entered the airlock, she told him to turn around because she couldn't live on the boat without him. Aurora returns to the reactor, where the temperature has reached a critical level. A bolt of lightning from the reactor shot up his arm as Jim moved closer to the vent. Go outside and see the door. Temperatures rose in the reactor room as it tried to get through the ventilation hatch. Open it. He quickly realized that he would have to hold the door open manually so the reactor could ventilate. And he said to Aurora, she doesn't like this plan, but he goes through with it and tells her to purge the reactor. She doesn't want him to die and they argue, but he tells her that they have to save the world, others, and purify the reactor. The process was successful, but the smoke from the reactor pushed Jim away and broke his connection. The pressure in his suit also decreased. He told Aurora what happened and she moved as quickly as possible to change into another outfit and brought him in. He apologized to her again. She puts on a costume and flies off to find him, but her leash is too short. She backed away, but suddenly grabbed his bonds and pulled him in. Aurora drags Jim to the infirmary and discovers that he is dead. She uses Mancuso's bracelet to bypass medical procedures and revive him. The medical module does the job automatically and revives Jim. Aurora forgives him. Afterwards, Aurora repairs Arthur and they bury Mancuso in the appropriate space. Jim takes him to the infirmary and tells him that he has figured out how to use the medical module like a hibernation. He told her to go into the compartment and spend the rest of the trip there. However, As will be revealed later, she refuses and decides to stay with him. Sober on the train, Jim eventually proposed to her and they live their lives on the ship. 88 years later, Avalon arrives at Homestead 2. The crew woke up and found the ship in a very surprising state. Aurora leaves them a message telling the story of her and Jim's life on the ship while others are sleeping.